And we're live.
Hi everyone, welcome to the very first webinar for a new open online course, Evaluation for Connected Learning, that's being taught by Bill Penuel at CU Boulder. And I'm super happy to be the moderator for this kickoff session where I'll be asking Bill some questions just about his goals for the course and the first assignments and readings of the course, and laying out the structure of the course. So this is our orientation webinar, and we have a hashtag, hashtag CLEVAL, Connected Learning Evaluation. Again, that's hashtag CLEVAL. So anybody who's listening along live, please feel free to reach out to us in the hashtag and ask questions, and we would be happy to respond to them in the Hangout. Okay, so Bill, good to have you here with us.
Hi,
at
Mimi.
DML Commons. Maybe you could start just by talking about your goals for the course.
Absolutely. So the big goal I have for everyone here is to become familiar with some of the big ideas of program evaluation. I think many of us, when we encounter evaluation, we do so in a time when we're expected to jump right in and answer a question that somebody's already posed and already framed for us. And it's easy to lose the big picture, and I hope that people will see the benefits of a more deliberate approach to designing and building evaluations. And really what we're going to focus on is how you can learn how to build an argument in evaluation. From my standpoint, evaluation is a form of argument. It's about building an argument with evidence. And why do we do this? Well, for one, the initial questions that we're often given, whether we're program evaluators or we're a program, they reflect the funder's goals, and they're not always the right questions to be asking for ourselves for program improvement or even for accountability. There are often many more stakeholders that we ought to be thinking about when we're coming up with our evaluation questions. We have to think also that our participants may benefit for our program. That's what we hope, but it's also useful in the evaluation to say, well, but how might they also be harmed by them? And to design our evaluation around questions about both benefit and potential harms. One of the challenges, too, that we'll be tackling is that oftentimes the outcomes that we're given or that are intuitive to take on, they're not appropriate for particular program designs. And that's because we're often driven by accountability pressures. But those things that are available aren't necessarily the best. And so in evaluation, tailored measures are often required specific to the program. So we'll learn a little bit about that in the course. And one big idea about thinking about evaluation as a form of argument is that I don't believe it's possible for data to speak. We speak. We need evidence, yes, but really it's about building an argument with evaluation evidence organized around a set of claims that we want to support. We have to interpret those data. They don't speak for themselves. They're always going to be qualified. There's going to be something not quite perfect about those data, but we're going to have to come up with a synthesis to judge their value. So we're going to be learning in this course the steps to building an evaluative argument. And I hope that you will participate actively. And the way that you'll do this is joining these webinars, reading the readings that are associated, and then addressing a set of challenges that the people that I'll be interviewing over the coming weeks will be presenting. They're practical challenges, and I'll say more about them in a moment, to evaluation that are real and that are presented by a set of evaluators and the program leaders. And I hope you will at the end see how these different steps to evaluation that really organize the different sessions of this course are really coherent, and you'll be prepared to really understand what it means to evaluate connected learning programs in particular.
Hey Bill, it's interesting how you describe evaluation as building an argument. I'm curious, you know, for researchers like myself, actually, who's a researcher and an educational researcher, but doesn't necessarily have a lot of experience in evaluation research. You know, what makes an evaluation different from other, you know, just studying, learning, or people's practices?
Well, I think evaluation is first and foremost about, as the term as is embedded in there, it's about judging the value of something.
Mm-hmm.
It's a program, it's a policy, it's a specific project. And so we're making this synthetic appraisal of the worth of something. And we're also trying to describe it. And we are also in a specific relationship to other people that's quite different from research. We might have a relationship to a funder that's a little bit more different in basic research that might be funded by, like we have a grant. But in evaluation, we have to be responsive first and foremost to a client who has specific questions, and also to stakeholders who may not be the client, as well as participants in the evaluation. And I think that makes evaluation a different kind of endeavor. Maybe not more complicated or complex, but complex in a different way than other forms of research.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating, and I've already learned a lot from you, Bill, about that. Different from, what we do in anthropology more traditionally, which is, you go in and you're really accountable to the research community and building your own arguments. So, I love how the course is structured to, give the learners a sense of that broader sort of relational and partnership climate of evaluation, as well as, just the empirical tools of research that a lot of us on the research side may have more familiarity with than how you deal with these stakeholders and accountabilities, which are unique to evaluation. So hopefully this is a course that will appeal not only to people who are, on the practitioner side, trying to figure out how to work with evaluators, but also researchers who may not have done evaluation research but are curious to give it a spin. So I guess that brings us to my next question for you, Bill, is, what are some of the concrete things that the co-learners in this class will gain practice with?
Great. So we'll all be, as I mentioned, one of the ways you can participate is through responding to a set of practical challenges that are posed by the people that I'll be interviewing. And I think that term co-learner is so great because we're all going to be positioned as learners, including the people who are presenting you with those challenges. I've asked them, and I will be asking them to tell us, what's the real dilemma that you face in your evaluation right now that maybe people in the course can help contribute to. And the reason I've organized it that way is my view is that evaluation is really the art of the possible. It's what can we do? It's a very practical kind of endeavor. And what can we do given our resources, given the constraints, given the questions and challenges before us? And so really I hope that you will engage in this creatively and responsively. So creatively because evaluation requires a lot of invention all the time. We have to take the bull by the horns with difficult dilemmas and figure out the best that we can do. But we also have to do so in a way that really is responsive to what we've heard others say that they need. So I hope that through this you'll get a feel for what I actually think of, to borrow a phrase from Howard Becker, the tricks of the trade in evaluation. Because I think there are some, and they really pertain to how we invent and test our inventions, our thoughts and proposals with our clients and with stakeholders over time. So the way this is going to work is each session will open with an overview of the topic where I'll present the big idea for that day and tell you a little bit about that in the context of evaluation theory and practice. And I'll also talk a little bit about how the reading that was assigned for the day relates to that big idea and how it also sets up a set of decisions that evaluators have to make. For example, in next week's sessions, we'll be talking about theories of change and how those can guide evaluation. Well, the theory that people have about how their program is bringing about outcomes, that has huge implications for what we ought to be measuring in an evaluation. But even how you get to that involves a lot of decisions. So I'm going to try to highlight those for us. Each session will have an interview. It's going to be with evaluators and program leaders for the most part. The exception is the last session where we'll have a team of evaluators who have evaluated many, many out-of-school programs. And it's going to be focused on real challenges, not hypothetical challenges. So I've asked them to present stuff that they're really grappling with. And you'll have an opportunity in the forum to provide your answer online. So again, I hope that what's going to happen is that there won't be anything formulaic. This is not about a textbook approach to doing evaluation. Those certainly ideas from the field I'll bring in that you'd find in a textbook. But really, I want to highlight the responsive nature of evaluation and how important it is for user needs and constraint evaluation so that you can see that practical nature of it. And really, I think of it as what I hope that you'll develop here through this is that to see evaluation as a form of design thinking. This is a very popular idea right now, but I think about what has always allowed me, when I've had success in evaluation, it's because I really think of it as a design problem. And one of the reasons I actually really love evaluation, goes back to this distinction between research and evaluation, is that the constraints are baked in, and I actually find that it's easier to be creative with those constraints. It's like I've got to work within these parameters. And I really enjoy that form of design thinking. And I think that's exactly what learning to be a good evaluator is all about.
Yeah, that is one of the things that is great about evaluation work, because it's not like you're doing research and then trying to find relevance in practice. Like, it is relevant research that's meaningful in practice right away. And I think that's very exciting. Like, the little bit that I've been involved in is, it's real world by its very nature. And I love how you've designed the course to also be a real world course. So you're sort of eating your own dog food with evaluation. Like, these are real problems, real design issues. And I think that's much more exciting than, doing a lot of hypotheticals, because there isn't, as you were saying, a cookie cutter approach that you can take, especially for, I think, some of the kinds of programs that you're looking at in connected learning.
And you'll get to see me try to figure things out in these interviews, and that's important.
Yeah.
The relevance isn't baked in or guaranteed just because it's evaluation, and a lot of times when evaluation goes off the rails, it's because the evaluator hasn't heard the people that they're supposed to be responsive to.
Yeah.
And so my interview questions will be designed to try to elicit things, and I'm hoping people will join in on Twitter and get me to ask better questions along the way too, in case they're hearing things that they catch that I'm missing something about the program that they're trying to describe.
Yeah, I remember our colleague Dan Schwartz, when he does assessment work, he says, he starts with, it's like therapy at the beginning. You start with assessment therapy and try to figure out, really understand what the program goals are. So sort of along those lines, I mean, I think it's particularly difficult, or maybe it's just because it's my world, to do evaluations for connected learning programs. A lot of times, and when we started our survey work together for the Connected Learning Research Network, we had this idea that, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we could just use existing measures? People have spent so much time developing and validating this stuff, and it really was hard for the connected learning stuff. And I wonder if you could speak a bit to evaluating connected learning specifically.
Absolutely. So, and I remember too, I stopped you guys when I joined the network. And I said, "Wait a minute, we were trying to
make you made our lives so much more challenging." So thank you.
But part of it is trying to really be driven by what is and I think this is a key thing, is the model of connected learning has to be driving what you're measuring. Whether it's an assessment and evaluation are linked, they're distinct, because we use assessment tools as part of our evaluation, but they're not the same thing. But in both cases, you want the model to inform it. So I think one of the biggest thing to always remember with connected learning is that the model says, well, connected learning is stretched across settings. And it's not that the learning doesn't happen just in one place. And so that really shifts the things that we need to look at in evaluation. Because the typical program evaluation looks at what's going on in one setting. And so we have to consider instead in evaluation, what can this program contribute to the learning outcomes here? And contribute being the key word, because they're not going to determine or cause all the outcomes all by themselves. And so when we start out, that's one of the first things we have to start with. So like other program evaluations, you do want to study what's going on in the designed setting that's trying to promote connected learning, whether that's a civic engagement program or one that is teaching youth media or doing a combination of both. And this is where the intersection with traditional evaluation is good. That's what program evaluations usually do. But even here, what we have to do is think about, well, where else are kids engaging in this activity? And do those settings actually support the same goals and support young people's participation in the same ways? Or maybe they even undercut them. Because the messages that young people might get from friends or parents about the value, for example, of a gaming program, I bet they're not consistent across the settings of kids' lives. And so suddenly we need to actually analyze that. And so that's where something like our survey measure of the quality of young people's connected learning experience is really relevant, because it's designed to elicit where young people feel support for what they're engaged in and their interest-related learning, and where they may not feel that support. And so we can begin to get a feeling from that by using a tool like that. The other thing is, typically evaluation studies what the program leaders do in the program to support learning. And that's important. But another thing in connected learning is we have to study brokering. And I think people familiar with the model are familiar with this, but I think brokering is how other people help bring people into programs, and also how they help them connect to opportunities elsewhere. We know in connected learning that peers and adults, including parents, other family members, are really key to getting people into programs that are interest related, because they find out from their friends, oh, this sounds really cool, and those friends bring them in. And just as important, especially for the outcomes that we care about, is how does a young person get brokered out into the next thing that maybe isn't offered by that program but offered somewhere else. So the adult has to know about that landscape of opportunity. They have to have skill in recognizing what interests might be this young person might be developing in this setting that could be pursued and developed elsewhere further. So we have to be looking at that activity of adults. Are they brokering out? And then in order to know what that landscape of opportunity is, a broker can't be isolated. The after-school program director can't be unfamiliar with other opportunities in the ecosystem of a community or neighborhood. And so we need to study the brokers' networks themselves. So we might think about studying young people's networks, but we want to evaluate changes in brokers' networks, and hopefully program, like organization leaders, are helping expand the networks of their line staff. And related to that, the other thing with connected learning is it only happens when the organizations are connected to one another. So the organizations have to create pathways to level up and level out, meaning get better at what you're doing, but also find a place elsewhere, maybe outside your program, where you can do that. And I think we have to recognize, too, that organizations in the same community sometimes compete for young people. Their incentives for cooperation aren't always there. Sometimes the funders try to make that happen, but there's often implicit competition. And that's an important thing for an evaluation to look at, is to look at what are that mix of incentives in a community for competition and cooperation. When we hope that they're serving young people and connecting them to pathways, they may not, in fact, always be doing that. And finally, we have to really analyze the equity in the pathways. We have to take an ecological approach. So that requires having a map of a community and knowing where opportunities are, where young people are, and knowing how those things match up to the interests that young people bring. And those things aren't easy to create. We have some good models in the form of the Chicago City of Learning, for example, which has an online platform that captures all that data, and we can analyze that. we can analyze accessibility, but really that's an important thing for evaluation to look at. And again, evaluation, that's a real shift for evaluation, because evaluation typically looks at one program that is run by one organization or group of organizations. And so we're now looking at a landscape approach of experiences that the program's only one part of it. And that organization that's running that program may only be one source of opportunity for that young person. So again, we need to be evaluating what goes on in the program, just like regular program evaluation typically does, but the links between people and the links between organizations. And it's only when we do that that we can really properly assess the value, to evaluate appropriately a connected learning program. So this really challenges the conventional frames around program evaluation. And I would say I and others and everyone in this field is still learning, what does that mean for program evaluation?
Yeah, that's a really great example, Bill, of just one of the things that, is historically hasn't been measured, right? As part of a program evaluation, that the connected learning model really sort of pushes people to think about. And I mean, that's what's about doing evaluation research, is because it's an opportunity. Like, it's challenging to manage all the stakeholders, but it's actually an opportunity to change the conversation about how programs are evaluated. I mean, it's the same as assessment and testing in that way. The measures actually drive the practice and the funding and accountability. So if programs aren't measured by whether they are connected to other programs or whether they increase equitable pathways, then it's not a metric that drives resource allocations. So I think that's where it's so critically important that our theories actually get baked into the practice of evaluation, because it has such a big impact. And it's sort of a lever, one of the few levers that researchers actually have to make change in ways that are baked into our expertise and practice. And I remember when I was working with the UMedia Learning Lab in Chicago too, it was super challenging. I mean, like, just this idea that we would start asking questions about the brokering, like, that was really new. And then we were asking questions about whether kids formed relationships with one another, like that, and mentors. Like, that may actually be one of the most important things that programs measure, but most programs, they don't measure it. And then a program like UMedia, because it's a drop-in center, they don't do well on the traditional just high dosage kinds of measures that were developed in more structured contexts, but they do really well on the brokering and the relationship building stuff. And so I really want those things that programs are doing really well to be counted. I want programs to stand up and get counted for the stuff that they're really doing well on connected learning, which is so different from the skills and knowledge-based assessments that people are more familiar with.
I think this speaks to a point I made at the beginning, is you want to take a deliberate approach, and oftentimes the first questions aren't actually the right questions to be asking. When a program comes to me and asks for an evaluation, they often are interpreting something they think has come from their funder. It may have actually come from their funder, and it's their sort of best guess. But if we slow down and stop, we can do a better job of matching the program theory and what this program is actually doing and the outcomes up. And I think in terms of a disposition for the evaluator has to be a little bit courageous with a client and propose things that are at once responsive to what their deep needs, but sometimes challenge them on what they think their needs are. And that's just a really delicate balance to play, especially when you don't have an existing relationship to someone. So I can't underscore enough both the importance of relationship building, but I think your point goes to the point that I think evaluators do need to push. We do need to challenge. We do need to make use of our social science knowledge about how important it is to match what's plausible from social science theory, what could be accomplished a drop-in program is not going to have a big impact on test scores that the school has kids for every day for 6 days, 5 days a week, for 6 hours a day. That's a very different dosage, if you will, or exposure, and a different kind of alignment. So if you're not careful and you're overly responsive, you can wind up putting the program actually at risk by picking inappropriate measures.
Yeah, that's a good cautionary note. Yeah, you can do harm too, depending on the approach. So can you talk a little bit more about the different stakeholders for connected learning programs and program evaluation, and what folks will need to navigate there?
Absolutely. It's really useful if there's any amount of resource attached to a program or an initiative like connected learning, that there's probably lots of different groups of stakeholders involved. And in connected learning, we know that that's shifting because a major funder, MacArthur Foundation, that's really launched this, is shifting its focus. But people remain really interested in the model. In fact, I think people are designing programs more and more around the model. It has a certain stickiness to it as an idea for how to think about after-school programming that's interest-driven. So part of it is we'll still figure that out. There are other funders interested in the model. There are many program leaders and organizations in the after-school space that are interested in this model. Individual youth development folks who maybe move around a lot of organizations over their careers, it has some lasting and stickiness for them. So, the one big sort of rule here, and I think is so important when thinking about stakeholders, is you want to always, as an evaluator, try to figure, it's an ongoing process of trying to figure out who they are, and trying to listen actively for the commonalities, because that's going to be key to designing your evaluation. And from my point of view, it's also important to listen to the differences. I'll use the verb instrument. You want to instrument those differences of opinion, meaning you want to be collecting data to really inform in an evidence-based way differing points of view on the value of different components of a program, for example, or which outcomes are most important. There may be differences about that. And so I think once you start listening and you've had a few conversations with different stakeholders, you come to appreciate this big point about don't jump right away. Really take the time to get to know your stakeholders. So what do stakeholders want to know about connected learning? I think this is not really unique to connected learning, but it's common across most evaluation, and you can listen for these three kinds of things. One, everyone wants to know about outcomes. What difference, in our case, does connected learning make? And when we ask that, it's about outcomes that are socially valued by some group. They're not intrinsic to the program. So just saying connected learning is really enjoyable to young people usually doesn't fly with a funder or with a stakeholder. You need to show something like, for school-based people, it might be that it helps them stay more connected to school. For someone who is really concerned with citizenship outcomes and promoting that, does it really enhance civic engagement? So depending on who it is, it's something that's consequential for them. It's something that might be consequential for the young person's life chances, later in life. Some outcome that, if we can link connected learning to some proximal outcome that other people say, yep, that matters. And so how do we, we have to figure out, how do we demonstrate that? And it's never the case that stakeholders are going to agree perfectly on those. So it's useful to have multiple outcomes as a result, not just one that you're measuring. And we want to also, if we want to foreground equity, we have to think about, well, when is this program beneficial and for whom? Because programs are rarely beneficial for every group that they target. And so we have to really think about that in designing the evaluation, that oftentimes, the programs aren't reaching the people they intend. And so you look at the program design, and those aren't the people who are coming. So oftentimes it's really a good first step to say, are the people coming that you're intending to come? And then are they benefiting? Second kind of question that I think people want to know about is, what's best practice in this design? What's working that we're doing? Which of our elements of the program design are having the effect that we are hoping for, if we're in fact having an effect? And to answer that question, we have to develop a theory of what those elements are. And we'll talk about this next week. But that's your theory of change. That theory is really informed by a mix of things. It's mixed by what people say and think are the active ingredients in a program. It should also be informed by social science research, if there are related programs where we know something from research about what active ingredients might be. And again, this is an area where I don't ever expect the stakeholders to agree on that. So one of the things I listen for in developing a theory of change are, what are some different points of view? And which of those different elements might we design instruments to measure? Are they being implemented or not? And are they related to the outcomes? So this is why, in my view, a study of implementation or enactment is critical to every evaluation, because I find this is almost always a question that people have, and the only way that you can get even a partial or tentative answer to it is to study implementation and do so in ways that are related to people's theory of what are their critical ingredients or active ingredients in their program. The last question people always have is, how do we make our program better? How do we have it so that it improves the outcomes for the people we're trying to serve? And so there we have to look for, is it expanding our opportunities and pathways for young people? And we have to look at what are the processes we have in place already for improving our programs. How will people use the evaluation results to make improvements? And is there a process in place for that? So one of the groups of people that I think are really innovating on this score right now in education are at the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. And they are borrowing and adapting methods from improvement science in healthcare to really help people see the systems that they're part of and learn how to use data on outcomes and implementation to improve systems. And so I think we'll be working with some of those ideas in the course online together, because I think they're so promising for answering this question of how to go about improving. So, we have to take, the bottom line is it's really important to take time to figure out who we need to ask these questions of. What are the right outcomes? What are the right things? Program designs. How do we set up? Who are the organizational people who can set up the improvement processes? And by doing so, I think we come up with those better evaluation questions. Not everyone will agree on them, but we'll have more people agreeing that they're the important questions to ask. And those are not going to be generic questions that tell us definitively for all time that connected learning works. They're going to really depend on the stakeholders of particular programs. And back to this point about argument. Argument is never about proof. It's about plausibility and convincing people. And any of us who engage in argumentation know that there's no one argument that convinces everybody. So that's part of just accepting. This is this is really something about the art of the plausible and the art of we're trying to make a convincing case, but we have to be prepared. We're not going to convince everybody.
You mean reality isn't just out there for us to discover? You're sounding more like a lawyer than a researcher.
Well, it's very interesting because I think the notions of argument really draw from some of the ideas of the philosopher Stephen Toulmin, who did think that some of these notions of argument apply very, very well to law, but they actually apply across a wide range of fields and professions. To really think about practical argument is one of the things that it means to become a professional in different fields, and evaluation has a certain flavor of the kinds of arguments we build. But this notion is one of the nice things, synergies, is that this notion of argument is also central to assessment design today. The field of psychometrics really embraces this idea of assessment as a form of arguing from evidence about how people learn. And so those ideas actually in assessment come from evaluation. come from some ideas of Ernest House, who wrote a paper back in 1977 on evaluation as argument and evaluative argument. And I think that's become a very powerful framework that you'll hear me, and it's going to run through this course throughout. That just helps to remember that over and over again. That's what we're trying to do here. Build an argument that convinces our key stakeholders and people who have a stake in this program of the value and worth of the program, or maybe not. Maybe it turns out that there are things that need to be improved.
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree with you, Bill, that it's really important to start with an appreciation of how research is never innocent of, politics and claims making, and that it's really just critical that we be honest and upfront about exactly what you can and can't know, and the fact that all of these issues, the way that evaluation and assessment is designed is really driven by, we use the term stakeholders as a shorthand for political interests. It's happening within a field of, fairly high stakes, power and funding and other kinds of relationships, and we need to really, confront that up front. And I appreciate, I think the metaphors that you're using for it are really appropriate ways to deal with it. It's not to say that we're fabricating things, but it's to say that, there's a certain amount you can know, and there are political and financial consequences to, the evidence that we come up with. And, we've seen the damage it can do when people feel like there's some reality out there that they think tests are measuring reality in some way that, holds people accountable inappropriately to certain measures too. There's just so much damage that can be done if we are not simultaneously doing the empirical research, but also understanding their application and what people are held accountable to based on those numbers. So, that's the kind of tricky and scary and sometimes dangerous side of it. But I think that on the positive side, when you find the right, theory of program theory, when you find the right measures, the right indicators, then it's incredibly clarifying. So, I have a program now too, because I run an online Minecraft program in my new startup, Connected Camps, and it was really the conversations we have about what we call them key performance indicators, because we're internet, but it's basically the same thing, that what you're holding your program to account for your goals, like having clarity on that is unbelievably important and also really challenging. So, like your question of beneficial for whom, like the equity measures for, we're trying to enroll girls, we're trying to enroll kids from populations that are underrepresented in tech. There's the learning outcomes, are kids making friends, are they forming relationships? All of these, we just have to make really hard decisions every day about the critical components of our program and whether we're meeting our targets. And having those indicators that our team is actually bought into, that we are committed to making the argument around that, about the value of our program, it's just unbelievably important. So I'm looking forward to running our program through your process as well, Bill.
You mentioned the sort of sensitivity to the politics, and the evaluators then often is always part of that system, and I think you mentioned that's so important to really take responsibility for your role in the system. And you never know what that is when you enter a situation. Evaluators are often brought in after a program is funded, or maybe late in the game in a proposal. So a whole set of players are usually in place when the evaluator comes in, and they've got to figure out this landscape and how people are related to one another. And depending on the program too, the evaluator could be in a unique position to know much more about the differences across different stakeholders in terms of points of view, the stakes that they really have in the program. if everyone negotiates the program theory of change together, who has a stake, often, everyone's privy to similar kinds of information, and the evaluator has a facilitative role. But sometimes you have to go, the evaluator has to go from person to person and generate that theory, because there aren't resources to bring people together to generate it together. And so that carries with it quite a bit of responsibility. With whom do you share the synthesis that you've made? Because all these people are stakeholders, but at the end of the day, you're paid by one group. The evaluator is always usually consultant to an organization that's running a program. Sometimes there are independent organizations, like a federal contract or grant that's evaluating a federal policy. But even there, the evaluator is never independent, never fully independent. And so you're constantly negotiating that, how do I speak truth to power when I need to? How do I balance the viewpoints that I'm hearing here, and with whom do I share the information? These are ethical questions. These are political questions that you have to wrestle with.
Yeah, that sounds very challenging. I've never, you've had much more experience, Bill, doing, negotiating all of these different roles. It's, one thing to be, looking at programs from the point of view of a independent university researcher, and another to, you have a real impact, and you're also directly implicated as a contractor in a lot of cases. So that I'm looking forward to hearing more about that fancy footwork that evaluators have to do.
And I hope that I can talk about, and I can get my panelists to talk about the mistakes that we've made along the way too. So, because there's really no way to succeed all the time at this because of how tricky it is, I think.
Yeah, because I've been in so many conversations, where you're looking at a program and there's just so much distance between what one group thinks the program is trying to accomplish versus another group. Like people, it's sort of this interesting Rorschach test, because it's not an empirical question, it's a values question, right? Like, I want this program to do, that's what's the odd thing about educational research in general, because, unlike, say, KPIs that are for profits, where it's like money is a pretty transparent metric, like what you want kids to learn is actually very contested, like what you want people to be when they grow up. There's not a lot of agreement about that sometimes.
And evaluation puts that front and center. It's right there in the name.
It really makes you confront
what we're about is we are assessing the value of this thing, and so its contestability is right up front.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so let's make sure we have some time to, let you talk a little bit about some of the approaches to evaluation that you'll be covering that you think are appropriate for connected learning programs.
Great. So there are three approaches that you'll find written about in the evaluation literature that I think are especially appropriate for our task of thinking about connected learning evaluation. And I don't pick one because I think my view is that, consistent with what I've been saying so far, that we have to really be responsive to the situation, that you're going to need lots of different ideas from evaluation theory in order to guide your work. So, I think one way, too, is as you listen to me describe these or you read papers, what emphases are you drawn to? I think we each have a kind of natural affinity to ask, maybe not natural, we have an affinity to ask certain kinds of questions first. And I think those are the ones that might tell you kind of what theories are resonating for you. These are good, having a little bit of theory can help you go about planning an evaluation in a systematic way. So several of the points I've made today come from what is typically associated with stakeholder-based approaches to evaluation. And I think that stakeholder-based approaches are really embodied in standards for program evaluation. It's almost not, it would not be distinguishing to say that you do stakeholder-based evaluation. And yet there's a literature on it. And the idea is anybody who has a stake in the results should be somehow involved or consulted, or their perspectives taken into consideration in an evaluation. Typically, the funders and the program leaders are the ones that get most attention, and that's why it's relevant to keep this in the foreground, that I've got to keep thinking about who my stakeholders are, because the tendency is to forget the participants themselves as having a stake in the evaluation. The tendency is to forget families as having a stake, community members as having a stake in an evaluation. And so even if they're not actively participating in the evaluation, we have an ethical obligation to imagine their concerns, and hopefully we do more than imagine their concerns. We actually figure what they are out, and we assess whether they're really benefiting. But when we say we're being stakeholder-based, we're really taking seriously all of the different stakeholder groups. And right off the bat, I'll add, there's no way you can accomplish this task, right? So many people have a stake in a big program. You can't actually accomplish the goal. It's really an aspiration, and you have to think about it as a heuristic of, I've got to do the best I can with the resources I have to understand what the stakeholder concerns here are. The second thing is that a second approach is a utilization-focused evaluation, and this idea was really developed by an evaluator named Michael Quinn Patton, and a whole host of other people have elaborated on what this means. And we've been talking a lot about that here in the context of politics, like knowing that you are in this system, you have an obligation to anticipate how the results of an evaluation will be used, and design the evaluation to be used in the best ways possible, whether that is to inform a funder whether this has been a good investment or not, or to help a program know how to get better. And so designing a utilization-focused evaluation is both a lot of upfront work, but it's also work that you do when you figure out what you're going to say in your report, what recommendations you're going to make, and also how you're going to present those results back so that they can be used effectively. The evaluation doesn't end when the report is done. It really can be ongoing, but really you have a sense when you're doing utilization focused, I'm really trying to make sure that something gets taken up here. And I wouldn't be satisfied if my 100-page report ends up being a doorstop to somebody's office, or sits on a shelf. The other approach that is really characteristic of the way I like to think about it is participatory and dialogic forms of evaluation. That means that you're involving participants at different phases of the evaluation, from posing questions, generating a theory of change, sometimes even instrument design and data collection, helping interpret results and developing reports. Involvement in a participatory evaluation can be more or less. On one end of the scale where people are actually leading that, sometimes that's called and then I think in a more practical way, involvement is more limited in a lot of the work that I've done, frankly, but I still think of it as how am I giving people participation on the front and back end of evaluation. I try to make it extensive, and you've seen this in action with me, Mimi, with designing the survey for Connected Learning. As I would go, our team would go do some work, and then we'd come back to this group of stakeholders and say, do we get it right? And you'd say, no, you didn't get it right. I go back again, and we do this iteratively. So that's an example of involvement in instrument design, not in the context of evaluation, but that's one of the ways that you can involve people. Now, dialogic within this, for me, has a very specific meaning, and that is that I'm not aiming at the end of the day to create a consensus or one view of the worth or value of the program. I actually try to, at the end of the day, come up with statements about where people might disagree about the value of the program or which goals are important, and I might put that in a report. I'm not aiming at a synthesis or consensus view from the evaluation. I'm synthesizing, but part of my synthesis might result in some evidence that I can't actually integrate into a single story. So I try to preserve the voices of different stakeholders and counter voices in how I report and present back. to people, and always trying to represent as best I can the voices that aren't in the room when I present those back. All of these approaches, are encourage and value the flexibility of the evaluator. And they also foreground values, the values of stakeholders, the values of people who are users of evaluation, and use itself as a value. The idea that you don't want to just do evaluation for the sake of evaluation, but it's so that people can use the results. And then participation has a value underneath that. That approach says, look, we all have a stake, and therefore those who have a stake also should be participants and have a say in the evaluation. So, as you read and you participate in the online discussions here, I invite you to listen for where your questions incline and which approaches you resonate with. Which uses of evaluation really resonate for you. And I think that these will become lenses for you for being able to appreciate and also critique evaluations that you encounter in your everyday life, and also the kinds that you want to produce if you're an evaluator. And I hope that that you'll conclude that evaluation theory can be of practical use. And that's something Carol Weiss said many years ago about the practical use of evaluation theory, and that's really, I'm hoping that people will see that these three approaches especially have a lot to offer for us in connected learning, because we're also connected to this system, and this is a way to honor and respect and be consistent with a lot of the values that our programs have for example, youth participation. So that's what we're going to emphasize in the course, and hopefully you'll see that reflected in the interviews and the course content.
And I'm sure these approaches are things you've learned through many, many years of practice yourself. Bill, how long have you been doing this kind of work now?
Been doing evaluation work since I was a graduate student, and my very first evaluation was of a community health prevention program for HIV/AIDS prevention. That was a youth peer leadership program. And I think it really was formative for my approach, because I would say that I've been exposed to all these ideas, but I learned them as I made my mistakes, because I never took a formal course in program evaluation. But early in my career in youth development organizations, I found myself as, oh, you're the guy with a research background because you're in grad school, so we'll have you work on the evaluation. And so I learned, I made every mistake an evaluator can make, and I'm hoping I can help people in this course maybe make one less mistake than I've made. But it does come from a lot of years of doing program evaluation in schools and after-school settings. So.
Yeah, so all the learners, co-learners in this course should appreciate the fact that we have this unique opportunity because Bill has been sort of a practicing evaluator for, a very long career, and this is the first time, right? You're offering it in the form, your wisdom accrued through years of hard practice in a course. So I think it's really a unique opportunity that we have here. So speaking of which, why don't we take the last few minutes just to talk a little bit about the nitty-gritties of the course. If you want to introduce the readings for this week and the assignment for our co-learners.
Yes, so there's a reading this week that I think will be a recognized tale for anyone who's working in the after-school area. That I assigned it because I think it illustrates well some of the risks involved in taking on accountability measures in your evaluation, but also the real constraints people face when having to become accountable to school-based outcomes. So as you read this week, I hope that you'll read for what I would call the skew that accountability can have on evaluation, but also the creativity and the responsiveness of the evaluators. And some of you, I think, will likely, and I hope you will recognize yourself and your role in that situation. So this particular evaluation is in the context of how after school had to respond to No Child Left Behind, which really put a lot of pressure on after school programs to get school-based outcomes for out of school. And it was not an appropriate outcome to pick necessarily for a program focused on safety and social skills. It's also a case where the evaluators themselves were pushed because they were encouraged to use randomized control trials, using a treatment and control group where students would be randomly assigned to either receive the program or not. And so, one of the things they did creatively was to do an analysis of whether the outcomes were better for the young people who were in the program, depending on how much they were part of it. So you'll see evidence of the evaluators adapting in there. So take a close look, and I hope that you'll see in that the tricks of the trade that are in use in evaluation, and how people with a pretty small budget managed to take on increasingly complex evaluation challenge. In terms of what I'd like you to do this week is use the forum to introduce yourself, and also to answer the questions that are posed there, which are, what do you hope to learn from this particular course? And also, I'm assuming as a co-learner, you bring experience in program evaluation, either as someone who's been a participant, who's had to fill out a survey that was part of evaluation, or you were a program leader, or you were an evaluator. So what experience do you bring that you think is relevant and that might be a resource to others in the class? So I hope that you will post on that, and I'll just say that some of the people in my face-to-face course that we were running in parallel to this one will be posting online too about their goals and some of the resources that they bring to the course. So the people here at CU will, Boulder and our doc seminar will be posting as well.
Yeah, that's an important part of the course too, right? That you're also teaching it locally, face to face, and so we're hoping that we'll have some really great interaction between our open online participants, and then you have your students locally, and then you're also bringing in practitioners through the webinars. So it's a really nice, I think, innovative design for the course as well, that those of us at the DML Hub we've been experimenting with different kinds of connected courses, and I really love how you put this together, and it really requires active engagement with real-life case studies, and we're hoping all the online participants will jump in and interact across all of these different stakeholders that we have convened for this course. So yes, you can get to the forum if you go to DML Commons. I think there's links in the weekly assignments, but you can get to the forum through the top navigation, and you'll see Bill's syllabus broken out week to week, and we'll have a similar structure each week where there'll be a kickoff webinar. This is the only one that has this kind of introductory overview feel, and Bill will also be doing a local class with lectures, and the students will be participating online. So you'll notice that there's different kinds of participation for different groups, and then I would encourage everybody to continue to use the hashtag CLEval, and also use the forum for the posting of assignments. Introduce yourself. Feel free to discuss topics that come up and are interesting to you, in addition to the prompts that are seated for each week, and then also, these webinars, these Hangouts will be archived if the schedule doesn't work for you to view them live. And the next one is scheduled for January 25th at 10 a.m. Pacific, and Bill will be talking with some folks at the Colorado, the CU Engage Center. And Bill, do you want to say a little bit more about the center and your guests for next week?
Yes, so CU Engage is a program here at CU, and it's a center, meaning it's a center that houses a number of programs that are really focused around the mission of linking teaching, service, and community at the university level. And so we'll have a couple of people from that program talking with us about two programs that students in my face-to-face class will be helping out with the evaluation on. And one is a service learning program and civic engagement program called Public Achievement, and another is a program called CU Dialogues, which focuses on difficult conversations among different people that faculty can have people come in to the university to talk about. So this will really hit the civic engagement angle of connected learning, I think, very nicely, and also how we connect universities and schools in everyday life. So the institutional connections of connected learning will be figure prominently here.
Sounds great. I can't wait to listen in to next week's webinar. And thank you, Bill, again, for making this course available to all of us on the internet. So we'll look forward to the session next week.
Thanks, and thanks for joining, everyone.